welcome back to the So There I Was podcast. I'm your host again, Travis Womack. Today's guest is John McGlothlin. He's the author of How to Deal with Damn Near Anything, the Paratrooper's Guide to Life. So we're going to have a great time. This is 2 episodes in a row of having paratroopers talk, which is always going to be a good time. And so, John, welcome to the show.
Appreciate you having me.
So first things first, if you're saying you're a paratrooper, where were you at? You got to cover those bases.
I was in the 173rd Airborne. See,
nice.
Given the choice between Liberty, now formerly Bragg, and Italy, that was not a difficult choice for me. Yeah. I ended up spending a little time at, I'll just say Bragg because it was Bragg back then, kind of place it. And the units are great, but Italy's unbeatable. So it's very thankful to spend time out there. I was there from 2007 to 2012. And then I was at E6 at the time and I made 7. And they're like, you got to go. Like, you can't stay in this slot forever. And I was like, okay, I get it. And they wanted me to transfer. They actually pitched me a slot at Bragg that was not an airborne slot, which for anyone not familiar with that, the reason that base exists is for high-speed jobs. And they wanted to give me kind of a desk job with a desk in the middle of nowhere. And I said, listen, I don't have to, I want one or two things. Live somewhere great, do something cool. I understand I may not get both, but give me one or the other.
Yeah.
So after some back and forth, I said, you know what? I'll join the National Guard, live where I want to live, be a soldier part-time. And that's what I've done since.
Nice. Very cool. So walking around 173rd out there in Italy, how many guys were still there with their mustard stain from the invasion?
A small sample, but
yeah.
probably only saw single digits. There was definitely some guys who were civilians now who had been in the unit back then. But I can only think of 2 or 3 dudes that were there still in the unit. And obviously one of the unique things about it is you could stay there if you were an infantry guy. I was a human intelligence guy in an infantry unit. But for the infantry dudes, there were enough slots where they could stay there. But by that time, most of them had filtered out. It was a fresh group of guys like me tackling the challenge.
Yeah, I was in 325. So
nice.
I got there right after the invasion of Iraq, and there was a jump into Iraq, and they got scratched for various reasons. And man, the animosity in the airborne community about like not jumping is like way up there. So
yeah, and we all know that as that jump turned out, it was not the most dangerous
right. It's very muddy
ever made. Yeah, that was the biggest danger, frankly, from what I heard. So much respect, obviously, I love the 173rd. I grew up, I had deployed previously as part of the 101st, but I really grew up as a soldier in the 173rd, to be honest. And that's no shade to the 101st, had a great experience there. But 173rd was a different level, and I'm very thankful for my time there.
It's a little hidden secret. I mean, not hidden by any means.
Oh, it is.
It's if you're married, or it's awesome. Like, it's not like unlike Korea where you can't take your family for the most part. You can take your whole family over there and hang out and like, it's 4-day weekend. We're going to Paris.
It is one of the reasons. So when I first got out of active duty, I wasn't going to write a book, right? It was never something I'd planned to do until I had a chance to kind of digest. It took a couple of years for me to digest what I'd really learned. And I didn't know the 173rd existed until I finished my first enlistment. Was like, you know what, I'm liking this enough. I'll do one more. And I was like, let me go to Europe and talk to Branch about where I could go. And they originally were going to send me at that time, the unit was split between Germany and Italy.
Yeah.
And I was going to go to the Germany part. And they said, wait a minute, you're the only human dude we have who's ever deployed in a human slot before. They had some reclasses that had done other stuff.
Yeah.
You're going to brigade headquarters now, so you can train everybody else. And that was in Italy. So I only had the broadest understanding. Luckily, I had enough curiosity to want to go to Italy, enough initiative to at least seek that out. But I didn't know half of what I should have about. If I'd known as much as I ended up learning, I would have chased that assignment a lot harder and a lot earlier.
Yeah, I have a lot of friends that are like, I'm like, are you moving back to the mainland, or you just gonna stay in Germany and Italy? And like they just keep cycling over, and I'm like, you got back-to-back assignments in Germany? I thought you could do that. So it's always funny. So let's talk about your book a little bit, since you just
Certainly.
kind of brought on there. So how to deal with damn near anything. Paratroopers Guide to Life. Great name, by the way. Great name. So what inspired this book?
Well, I had to bring a little bit of light profanity to the name. I'm not trying to get banned from the bookshelves, but I would at least give an idea of the kind of stories I'd be telling. So honestly, the book was probably like a lot of books, born of failure. And specifically my failure to adjust to being a civilian, because no offense to my Guard people, but once a month is once a month. And I'm deeply thankful for the Guard and all the opportunities it gives me to still be in.
Totally
But at the end of the day, you're civilian most of the time, and you got to at least be able to deal with civilians most of the time, even if you're still a part-time soldier. So I was not great at it to start. I had a 6 month gap between leaving airborne infantry world and sitting at a desk at law school. And man, you would have struggled to find anybody in the world more judgmental than me. I was throwing, and I wouldn't say too much about the things I saw, but people are smart. They know when they're being judged, even
Yeah,
if
yeah.
it's just a look that you give them. And I didn't appreciate all the things I've learned in the military, particularly in the airborne. With I didn't realize the lessons that had been taught implicitly, not the things we say out loud necessarily, but the kind of environment we create, the kind of expectations we have, the kind of training that you get, and the kind of development that you undergo. And I saw a lot of people in the civilian world. And first I thought maybe it's just law school. It was not just law school, it was everywhere.
Right.
The development we got was unique. And it's something that schools and workplaces in the civilian world don't do, and they don't do for good reasons. It's not that they don't care; it's not that they have different jobs to do. And school is designed to teach you something that will get you a job. And yeah, there's other things that happen on the side. You meet people you wouldn't have met before. You
Mm.
grow in that sort of way. But that's kind of unofficial. And then obviously you go have a job. That's a
Right.
business that's got to stay open. It's a government job that's got something that's got to do. They don't necessarily have the ability to invest in training you the way the military does, because the military's got a plan like they've got you for 20 years. You may bounce after two,
Right.
but they have to at least train you like you're going to stick around. Because if you do stick around,
And
you have
and
to make
keep
sure you
training
don't
you.
suck. Yeah.
Yeah.
So after I had some perspective, a couple of years of being out of active duty, I was like, okay, I'm judging these folks around me for not knowing something that they were never taught. And that's not fair to them, right? Nobody's trained them. It's like you see in the military, you see somebody that can't hack it. You got to figure out, is this person lazy, or did nobody ever train them right? And if given an opportunity, given the kind of information that they should have received earlier, can they grow? Can they change? So instead of just judging the crap out of everyone, I decided, why don't I take a look at exactly what lessons I learned, write them down, put some structure on it, and see if I can't bring a different side of the military to people. It's not about combat. It's not about combat stories, because I've deployed once each to Iraq and Afghanistan. Obviously, those are going to be meaningful experiences for me for the rest of my life. But that's not what I use day to day now. That's not
Yeah.
what life calls for when I'm dealing with regular people. It's about all the other stuff I did, all the development that we got as soldiers and as paratroopers, the opportunities we got to learn that other people didn't. So I boiled it down to 5 traits, and I thought, okay, these are the best 5 things that I can encapsulate all the different things we learned, and wrote about them, and am using that as a way to bring that other, I call it the hidden side of the military, the training side of the
Hmm.
military, and bring that to people in hopes that they can learn some of these lessons too.
That's a good deal, man. It's funny you mentioned that because I was an army recruiter for years, and when I just came back just from Iraq, and right in recruiting, I was like, I'm going to lose my mind. Like like 3 months ago I was getting shot at, and now I'm trying to go to this high school, and I'm about to lose my mind. Like it was a tough like transition for me. So I totally relate to that. And and now that I retired, it's funny you mentioned that, because I recognize that a lot and talk to people all the time, and kind of like, oh, that bothers you? That doesn't bother
Right.
me. Like it's
Yeah.
like I catch myself thinking that all the time. Like I throw around, oh yeah, you've been in really hot places, you've been in really cold places in Afghanistan, and so
Yeah.
it's like you just we have a different metric that we grade or evaluate or judge, or and I think a lot of people struggle to do that. So it's really cool that you wrote a book on this. What's the what's the biggest like challenge you had kind of going through this? Not the publishing part, that's its own challenge in itself, but like trying to translate to on paper. What was that?
Well, you don't want to, the things that make people respect the military can kind of put us on a pedestal that people feel like they can't reach, right?
Hmm.
So they respect this, but they don't understand this, which is a good place to be in, all things considered. I don't know how many foreign military folks you have the chance to work with, but like they don't get the love from the citizens of their
Oh no.
countries overwhelmingly that the love we get from the American people. So we're very fortunate.
Yeah.
But people don't always understand this, and they kind of think that it it works in our favor sometimes because people have a very good opinion of the military overall and the people who serve. But then when it comes time to interact with us in a non-military
Yeah.
capacity, where like you want to try and get a normal job, you want to try to, be a more well-rounded presence, people assume that either you can't do it because your experience is so different, or that they assume they can't learn anything from the military because the military is all about facing danger. And obviously there's a part of that, but what I try to tell people is, and this is how to overcome that challenge, everything you see in a movie was possible because of everything you don't see in the movie. Right. And I get it. The whole Rocky has a training montage. He can't train 95% of the movie and then fight for an hour.
Yeah.
Right.
Because that's how it is. A whole lot of push-ups and sandbags.
There's a lot more punching pieces of meat in a freezer than there is being in the ring, but that's not entertaining. And that's not about entertainment all the time. It's not compelling a story to see.
Right.
But everything people see about the military that they know is made possible by stuff they don't hear as much about. And that stuff they don't hear as much about is the stuff that they can learn more from. So the biggest challenge was getting over that hurdle of just people thinking about the combat context of things, and teaching them that there's other lessons that you can learn that don't have that prepare us for that. But you don't have to be going to war to benefit from it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I remember I had I was airborne infantry, and before I commissioned, and all the time they're like, "Why did you infantry? Like, the only thing you can do when you get out is be a security guard." I'm like, "Have you ever been in an infantry platoon? Like it's
such an insult."
Yeah, that's the skill
unintentional
set,
one.
The direct skill set I get. I understand. Like if you're a welder, you learn a direct, tangible skill that you can immediately cross over and go be a welder anywhere, right? Or mechanic, and for the most part, some of those jobs, intelligence, you can do that translates over pretty
you get
easily.
A clearance, you're set.
So people like look at the main tangible skill, and I'm like, well, I was at E6, and I had a squad of 9 that covered 9 different states, and where we all joined from. I was like, but 3 of those guys came from different countries. We had a dude came from the islands, and another guy was Asian, and like he was like actually Asian. His parent, he's the firstborn in America. And so it's like you have different cultures to mix. I was like, if you go work at a job, you're a shift manager at a fast food place or Dick's Sporting Goods or something, it doesn't matter, right? Some retail job. Like pretty much everyone has the same cultural, because they all live right there, but like you're an infantry squad leader, you got 9 dudes or dudettes. Is that the term we're going with now? I don't know. Anyways,
it works.
People, and you got to make people that have different religious beliefs, different background, cultural beliefs, different
personalities.
I mean, aside from who plays better football, but Texas, of course. But and you put them all in a thing and say, hey, look, we all don't agree on like 90% of our stuff, and that's okay. Nobody cares. What we care about is this 10% over here, and we got to go be a team and not die doing it. And I think
the military is an education in people.
It really is
overlooked, especially for combat arms type jobs. One of the things I talk about in the book is the first trait is self-awareness. So why are people more self-aware in the military? Because you spend so much time around people. Like in a regular job, you may see your boss once a day, maybe less, depending on it's like an office style job. Like they may not even be in the same place as you. Whereas in the military, if I'm spending hour after hour after hour around somebody, eventually people have to be more real with each other than they would be in normal life. And it makes people like, you will have somebody who's, let's say somebody is like complains too much, right? Or has some annoying habit. That's not just a nuisance, but it actually affects how effective they are with people. In the regular world, people are usually not going to have that conversation with them. People are going to look to avoid it. In the military, we spend too much time around each other. So if Bob is annoying, somebody's eventually like, Bob, shut the cup. We're tired of you complaining. Like, you will have these conversations that you don't have normally. And so it forces people, not everybody embraces it and becomes instantly a better person, but people have the opportunity. You get that raw material for improvement, that honest feedback that you're not going to get elsewhere. And so people, the education you get in human nature and dealing with people in the military is phenomenal, especially for jobs that aren't as technical. So where people really are the job, and you're training so much and you're around each other so much that you become, at least have the opportunity to become much better at dealing with important parts of human nature that are applicable everywhere.
That's a great point. It's you get around you see your platoon sergeant and you guys in charge of 50 something people, you know, you see them multiple times a day. And if you're deployed, it's like, can you please go away, please? Because I want to be 18-year-old kid just for a little while and be stupid, And but to your point though, is people you have those annoying habits. Maybe you're the guy that just complains no matter what. Hey, we're getting $1 million. No, we're gonna get taxes. Shut up, Bob. We're all getting $1 million. Like take it and walk away. And so we start making fun of it, and we start our like my speech. Like I'm from West Texas originally, so like I have a really bad habit of removing all spaces from my vocabulary and just making one very long word. So like it was this thing of like, oh crap, Womack's on the radio. Do we allow him to talk to? I'm like, shut up, I'm good. And they're like, I don't know. Can you call on a grid? So it just becomes just like your flaws become like the joke of the section, the platoon, whatever it is. And we all have our own flaws, and people like bathe differently. And you're like, dude, do you know how to use deodorant? And like, no, man. Like,
yeah, if somebody has, that's a great example. If somebody has a hygiene issue, even if it's not like end of the world, like we had a guy in basic training who, his locker happened to be in the very corner of the bay. So nobody was ever in front of it. Nobody ever was near. So drill sergeant's doing an inspection and he goes in front of it and he pretends to pass out because apparently the guy's locker smelled. And this is basic training, right? Everything smells.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So, but even by that low standard, his locker smelled terrible. And then we turn to each other and we're like, has anybody seen this dude in the shower? Because obviously we're all showering during like the specific period, right? So everybody's habits.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, we've never seen him in the shower. Nobody could recall. So he had to shower every hour on the hour until graduation, right? Now, did he become a better person because
I love
of
our
that?
problem fixing skills.
Right? Like, I hope so. But like, you get into people's personalities in a way that just is never going to happen.
Never exists. Yeah.
And I know it benefited me as somebody who could be too sarcastic, too talkative, a little too like a little extra. Like it benefited. People would clap back at me if I overdid it, and that was great reference point for me to be like, okay, maybe I should hang back on this one and let somebody else like do their thing instead.
Josh, it's called a brief, not a long.
Oh yeah, I would have always. I'm volunteering for shit. Like I have that. I very much have that. Like I'll figure it out. Let's give it a try type of thing. And that means, am I making sure that this guy next to me, who's more of an introvert, is he getting enough reps? Right. Because I'm going to want to jump in, especially if it's like a short deadline, like, hey, we got to get this shit moving. Like, but Bob is a smart dude, but Bob is a quiet dude. Is Bob going to get his chance in the sun if me or somebody else who's more extroverted is always taking up the slots? So it's good to have people be like, oh, you're briefing again, like, or
that's a great segue.
You're going to do this,
because I think that's a complete different viewpoint from the civilian world. Is you have that responsibility in the military of like, I got to do my job and I have to do it very good, but I have a massive responsibility to train this person behind me because we know we're going to cycle through, you know, and like Bob's got to come up and he may be E4 now. He's E5 tomorrow, like the pipeline will push them forward eventually, unless they're really, really, really messed up, which is few and far between.
Yeah. You got to commit a crime to not get another chance.
And civilian world is like, I have to do good and this is my job. I'm not responsible technically to make sure that Bob is figuring this out and give him the mic so he can brief the boss. Like, no, I'm always going to brief the boss. It's like I think that's one of the biggest things I've learned from watching, and I do some consulting work with people is like, look, you do have the business as a whole. Because if you don't help Bob's going to leave, and then you're back to square one with the new person. And who doesn't, maybe they do know they don't, but that learning curve, it changes. And so your turnover is going to be below you instead of going through you. And that's I think it's a unique thing that people don't really grasp.
And usually, and sometimes people in the civilian world, they're not in the military. It's kind of an expectation. It goes both ways. Like you're going to help other people out. They're going to help you out. They're going to develop you. You're going to develop them. The feedback goes back and forth. Civilian world, maybe Bob doesn't want you to help out. Maybe Bob's happy where he's at.
That too.
And you really got to read the room and know whether people are open to that or not.
Yeah.
Like, have they given you a signal that they're open to feedback, or that they're open to you playing a
Yeah.
role in their development, or do they want, or should you just be chilling out? Like, I would try to. It was ineffective, but when I was in the first couple years out of active duty, I would do my version of what the golden rule doesn't work all the time, right? Because
Yeah.
what I wanted was not what other people wanted, and they have the right to not want it. And
Yeah.
me trying to impose my more straightforward knife hand version
Yeah. Can't
of
do knife hand anymore.
interpersonal interaction. Yeah, it wasn't working. People are like, "What is that gesture?" No, I didn't literally do it, but it was
Yeah.
definitely a spiritual knife hand, and
Yeah.
everyone who I thought needed one.
They got
But
banned, right?
no, is it seen as
Yeah,
too like
the Marine
aggressive or
Corps
something? Or?
the Marine Corps actually like made it like against the rules. You cannot knife hand anymore. Back in like 2018, 19, something like that. Yeah, it was actually
Interesting.
it was a front page of Marine Corps Times, or whatever it is. Like no more knife hand. I remember being the PX and be like, oh man, that's not going to go through well. That's like
Plus,
that's
like
their thing.
another thing people don't understand about the military too is the part that besides combat, what do they know about drill sergeants, yelling,
Yeah.
aggressiveness?
Oh
That's
yeah.
a pretty short. That's a pretty short part of your career.
Yeah.
Like, as soon as you get out of obviously basic or the next training stage,
Yeah.
and then especially once you're out of the junior ranks, people aren't knife handing you. Like, you may
Yeah.
get in trouble if you mess up, but
Yeah.
like, people also overestimate how overtly aggressive the environment is. And you and I know it's hilarious more than anything else.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Like, and that's another thing I wanted to bring by writing about the experience. Was it's not all about getting yelled at and that
Oh
type
yeah.
of like movie stuff. A lot of it is putting your metaphorical arm around somebody, taking them around the corner and being like, hey man, that's not how you handle things.
Yeah.
Like, not making a show out of it, not to being loud, not putting people on blast in front of everybody, but taking them
Yeah.
aside and helping them out in a way that's way more subtle and way more
Oh yeah.
applicable to how the rest of the world works.
Yeah. I'll just give you not to tell my stories. I've got plenty of them, but
Please.
talking about the funness of like how you build that camaraderie and like use each other's stuff. Each other. So I was in Afghanistan. We had this one guy. He was abnormally hairy. Like I'm not sure what happened, but he had an excessive amount of like body hair on his arms, his chest. So we're really mean paratroopers, and we had access to a hot glue gun, and so he was asleep, and we took sheep shears, and we sheared a black sheep out there. We found whatever it was, and took all that wool, and we hot glued it to his IBA on the front. So in the morning he gets up and he's like, no, that's messed up. Like, he was just like, he was so defeated. We're like, he's like, but it's pretty funny. It's true. It's a problem. We're just like, I remember our PL was like, guys, seriously? We're like, sir, come on. He's like, that's freaking hilarious. And we had to go take it all off. It damages IBA, but it's just like one of those things, like we have our flaws. Like, and it's like, you can be against them, and then there's some things where you can go too far, obviously, and everything can do that, but
Yeah.
you can also embrace them and like have fun with it. And I think
most people get it right most of the time with finding the right level of like giving somebody shit without becoming mean or biased or destructive. For example, I had a roommate at one point, and this dude had some kind of like digestive issue, right? Because everybody's got gas sometimes, but this guy was like a factory.
Yeah.
Like, so I was like, hey man, like, you all right? And he's like, oh, and he played it off. And I was like, okay, I don't make a big deal. It's a roommate situation. I didn't know the guy. He's a nice guy. I'm not trying to make it toxic because of that one thing. But after a couple of weeks, I was like, bro, like, are you okay? Like, have you gotten this checked out? Like, and I knew he was, we were young at this time. I said, listen, you're going to take your pants off in front of somebody who's not me one day, and you're not going to get the reaction that you're going to get right now.
Yeah.
So while it's still me in the room with you, you need to fix this shit.
Yeah.
And he went and got checked out and had some sort of issue, got some meds for it. Yeah. And I don't know how the rest of his life. He's married now. I hope they're doing great.
Yeah.
But like, where else are you going to have that type of conversation?
It's very true.
Somebody's trying. So much of development doesn't happen because people want to avoid temporary awkwardness.
Yeah.
We don't avoid temporary awkwardness. Like, we're willing to push right through that awkward phase and have that conversation. Now, you may or may not be commenting about how people smell in the civilian world, but there are ways to take that lesson and apply it in terms of being willing to embrace that little bit of awkwardness in the short term for that bigger benefit in the long term.
Exactly. I was going to agree with you on that one, because it's no matter what the topic is, you learn like, oh, this is going to suck. Okay, fine. Bob, come here. You know, whatever that is, like, dude, the clicking of the pen, you're killing us all, you know. But it could be that simple. Like, everyone's talking about it, like, I'm just being nice. Stop it. You know, it's just bringing up.
And you can even to give a slightly more serious but non-combat example.
Yeah.
So I'm in the DC Guard. We were called up after the January 6th insurrection attempt. And so we got crazy hours, we got all kinds of things going on. And we had a certain leader that would making people pull long hours unnecessarily because of bad planning and shifting things around in ways that weren't necessary because of the mission. And I had a conversation with my peers. I was like, okay, one of us, because it was kind of we didn't have the normal chain of command thing, because it's kind of a ad hoc thing because it was a response to an emergency. So like, okay, let's talk. Let's three of us, because we don't have one person go. Let's three of us go talk to this leader and be like, hey, you're burning out the troops. You can't keep having this kind of schedule. People are they're taking time away from their regular jobs and their families. You got to get more organized. We didn't phrase it like that, but we said, listen, you're burning out. So we had that meeting in a way that is going to be much less likely in a civilian job, because you don't have that type of, we're working on these very short deadlines.
Right.
And this guy wasn't going to be my boss in 3 months when this operation was over.
Right.
So because the military cycles people out like that, you can have those conversations in a way you can't necessarily do when you're like, let's say it's the only company in your town that does the thing you do, and you're like, this guy's going to be my boss. If I piss this guy off, I'm screwed.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So we have the opportunity to have those conversations. And we went to the guy, and he was at first resistant, and then I think he looked behind us at everybody who was watching us talk to him, and he realized, wait a minute, like, I'm not talking to 3 people, I'm talking to like 300.
Those 300 are watching the messengers and see what happens. Yeah.
Yep.
That's a great point. That's a really good point. It's that cycle through, wait it out. Okay, this is a good boss, this is a bad boss. We'll just deal with it, and he can. That doesn't happen. Hey, this guy owns the company. Like, we don't have a choice but to come work for this guy. So,
but there's ways too, and even if you can't change that, there's ways. And I tell people, you're not going to be BFFs with somebody, best friends forever, but BPR, I call it, best possible relationship.
Yeah.
Like, even if that means you don't like people and they don't like you, you will find a way to get the most out of it anyway. So even if you are stuck in a situation where people aren't going to rotate out, there's still lessons you can draw from the military's ability to confront these issues that will help you at least make it the least crappy version of the situation that's possible.
Yeah, that's probably that's a great line. I'm still on that one, by the way.
Please do.
But it was
sadly, that was after the book. I didn't come up with that till like a month ago.
You should have copyrighted that one. That's a good one. But it's
new version.
It's the I think I got to revision it and put it in the new intro. Is that exact point though? You work with, there's people you don't like, and every occupation in the world, there's like, oh my god, this person's at work today again. And they're there the next day. But like, the unique thing of the military and infantry, for sure, in my experiences, is okay, we don't get along. I really don't like you. We're the same rank, which is always a fun one. You rate me by a month or two, who cares? But like, we have to be on the same page or we might die. And it's kind of a unique, like, push that to an extreme. And it's like, let's go not die and get it done. We can disagree with how we planned it, how we executed it, but no matter what we end up doing, we have to be on the same page. And it's that's a unique challenge, and that doesn't exist anywhere else, and it won't.
No, even in other parts of the military, it can be different, because being a human guy, sometimes I was in that situation, sometimes I wasn't, depending on what type of unit I was in, what type of job I was doing. So sometimes our version of that ended up being not we might die, but like, we're going to see each other all day, every day. So we need to figure this shit out and find some kind of detente, some kind of like middle ground where we can both function, and then we can, roll our eyes later.
Yeah.
But
it's a
waste of
marriage.
Energy at a certain point. Yeah.
It's an awkward marriage.
Waste of energy.
You just don't talk about moving, because it pisses off the spouse. It's like, okay, well, at work, just don't talk about these 3 topics, and let's just focus on the job. Like, I get it. You don't like football, I don't want to talk to you, or religion, or whatever it is, whatever the topic of the day is. But well, back to your
tell
book,
me there's a difference between the two in Texas.
It depends what part you're in. If you're down in Austin, it's a little different. I was kidding. So,
Fair.
but if what kind of feedback have you gotten on this book? I'm kind of curious on
It's been good. Because my concern, right? What worried me more than writing a book was writing a bad one, because I should just not bother. So I tried to go through before I wrote the thing and make sure that nothing similar, or it'd be fine if it was similar, but nothing the same had been written already. And that was a
right.
check, because a lot of folks are writing about their combat experiences for obvious and good reasons.
Yeah.
But this was a compliment to that. So that was the first test. Is this book going to suck? No. Okay, good. So I went through and was able to write something that I think stands up and is useful to people. And it doesn't have to be the greatest thing anyone's read, but it has to be worth their time and their money. And I haven't had anybody tell me it wasn't worth their time or money yet. And even it's funny because you start off with one of the things the book talks about, in fact, for the self-awareness piece is a lot. I did a lot of research, because the other thing besides not writing a boring book or a dumb book was not writing one that was contradicted by all the research that's been done into these things. If there's 100 studies saying X, I don't want to come out here and say, well, my one dude's opinion is Y, right? So I went back through and I incorporated a lot of research. People have been surprised how much research is referenced in the book. Well, like, they've done the work, so I want to make sure that I'm not giving bad advice. So there was something called pro-social lying, which is not a phrase I'd heard before, but you'll know what it means. It means people who care about you will lie to protect your feelings. Right. And there's a place for that. Like, if somebody broke up with somebody last week, maybe now is not the time to tell them that, yeah, you screwed up, or yeah, you shouldn't have been dating them in the first place. But a month later, 3 months later, there should be a time eventually where you can have that conversation. And we just talked about how in the military, you're more likely to have those honest conversations with people. So when I'm writing the book, the first people I tell about it, obviously, are people I know. And I'm like, listen, you're not doing me any favors.
Right.
When I'm a third of the way through this book by not telling me if you think it sucks. So I got good feedback. I incorporated that feedback, and it's gotten a good response. I've got an HR consultancy that wants me to develop a 3-hour training version of the book. So that should be launching next year. So no, it's been a good experience. And I feel like I did enough work on the front end where I've come up with something that fills a gap that exists. Because it was based off the gap I identified. The reason I wrote it to begin with was based off what I saw in a number of different places. So I was like, I know the gap is real. Can I fill it in a useful way? And I think the answer is yes.
Well, I agree. I mean, if we meet on LinkedIn of all things, like, which is all my guests, and you can just scroll through LinkedIn for 5 minutes, you'll find 45 veteran transition consultants, programs, people. I mean, there's obviously a need, and so the audience is there, and the kind of the great thing for it, this is my personal opinion, is that it's a never-ending audience, because it's always going to be transitioning service members,
and there's always going to be civilians dealing with them, and it kind of the goal. When I first did it, it was like, let me tell civilians what they can learn from the military, because it's what I learned that's been useful to me. But then it's worked the other way too. Is it actually is useful for veterans to know that this is what they have to offer, because you got to sell yourself more, because we're not used. I joke with people, I'm an extrovert, but not a self-promoter. Military doesn't encourage self-promotion. Going back to what we said about, if you see somebody 12 hours a day, you know if they suck at their job or not. They don't need to tell you they're great. You know where you don't. Right. But in the civilian world, you deal with a lot more strangers who don't have a common frame of reference. And you have to be more self-promoting. And hopefully this book will give veterans a cheat sheet of like, hey, here's the stuff I learned. And here's the stuff I can teach other people.
That's great. I think there's definitely a need for that. I talk to veterans all the time, and the most common thing is that of like, man, I don't know how to go do a job interview. I'm like, whew, let's you got to practice them for one, because we're not, until recently. I don't know if you're aware of the Army side, active Army, the new job market, basically the marketplace is for officers and stuff is. You do interviews, like you see all the jobs available, and you see like a job in Italy, and like you literally contact that S1 or that brigade commander, battalion commander, whatever level you're going to, and you have like a Zoom call and like sell yourself. And it's been interesting to see kind of the Army over the past 4 years. The first one was like, okay, we're going to do this by email, and there's a lot of units before I got out that were like, yeah, we set up a Zoom blocks for people, or whatever, Teams blocks, whatever they're using. And it's interesting to watch officers kind of shift how they have to talk about themselves. Like, hey, I can color inside the lines. It's like, great. So can everybody else. Give me some more, and
Exactly.
and learn about themselves, and be like, hey, well, I had this really cool job. I use myself as an example, not to be, arrogant here, but like I worked for the Dallas Mavericks for 3 years.
That's awesome.
And I was in like kind of in charge of the merchandise for a little while. And reported directly to Mark Cuban. So,
it's better working for the Cowboys. That's all I'll say.
Well, that's true. But like, but how does that, apply for a unit 18 years in my career? Like maybe the battalion commander wants to have unit t-shirts. It's like, well, I'm pretty good at that, so it's just interesting to see how like you learn how to sell yourself. So just great point.
My current job is a result of a random elevator conversation where there's this weird automated voice with a weird kind of British accent, but not really. I was like, I hope this was cheap. And like, I hope the computer said this and we didn't pay someone. And we just made a joke about it. Ended up talking with the dude who worked down the hall from me. He's like, hey, we need people to do this kind of thing. And now that's what I do. So it really, and I understand it's easier for an extrovert like me to have those conversations, but I also have had to learn when not to have them too. So whatever your default setting is, there's an upside and a downside to it. So you have to try to be self-aware enough and take the initiative to make the adjustments you need to get where you want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, John, what is if someone's getting your book and if they do like they do in some books and they just start and kind of set it aside because life is busy, what is the one thing, no matter what, you want them to take away, regardless if they finish it or not?
I think the most important thing I wanted to take away is the last trait of the 5. I called it insistence. It's about having standards and setting boundaries. And to me, that was the most lacking thing I saw in people. They were not, whether they were nice or not nice, they didn't always know how to have and enforce boundaries and set standards. And that's something we get a lot of training. So that's the one thing I want people to think about is how can they enforce standards in their lives and how can they set boundaries for how they want other people to interact with them.
That is some great stuff right there. So, well, definitely give thanks, John, for being on the show. And if you're listening, the link for the book will be in the description. How to Deal with Damn Near Anything, the Paratroopers Guide to Life, available on Amazon. And John, thanks a lot for being a guest, man. Look forward to maybe having you back on here pretty soon. And as you work on your training thing, maybe we can discuss that some more and maybe get people to have you as a trainer. It'd be awesome. But
do guest speaking as well. I'd be honored to, as I continue to work on these things. And it's funny when you write a book about self-improvement, you're like, man, I got to keep improving just so I'm not a hypocrite. So
it's very true. The learning never stops. So, but
exactly.
Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you on the next episode.